Saludos, it's your host, Gabe Morales, continuing with our series on Mexican drug cartels. Today, I'm going to cover the Sinaloa cartel. Now, this is going to be a fairly short episode. I could do just one episode on Chapo Guzman's escapes and recaptures, and solo videos on Eduardo Palma Salazar and El Mayo Zambada, the other two key figures in the Sinaloa cartel. But I only have so much time, so I'm going to do my best. When Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was arrested and broke up the Guadalajara cartel, Sinaloa was given to El Güero and Chapo. I'll start off by talking a little bit about Hector El Güero Palma Salazar, who is said to have been born in 1960, but that's my age, so I think he's a little bit older than that. At least his face shows the battles that he's been through in his life. He was born and raised in Sinaloa, just as many drug traffickers before him. And as a young man, he worked for Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, who was considered the padrino or godfather of the Guadalajara cartel. It was with this working relationship that he encountered Chapo Guzman and El Mayo Zambada. El Güero worked with a Venezuelan drug trafficker named Rafael Enrique Clavel, who dated Güero's sister Minerva, but later he would become his arch nemesis, as we soon will see. In 1978, Palma Salazar was arrested in Arizona for drug trafficking and sentenced to 8 years in prison in the United States. Once he was released, he found out that his wife, Guadalupe, had ran off with Rafael and their 2 children and was living with him in San Francisco. The thing is, this was all a game for Rafael, as it is said he was hired by the Arellano Felix organization, who offered a piece of the pie to him from their empire. Rafael forced her to withdraw millions from Güero's bank account that was held in her name. He then killed her, decapitated her, and shipped the head to El Güero. Güero and Guadalupe's 2 children, Jesus and Natalie, were then taken to Venezuela by Rafael, where they were thrown off the bridge and killed, all videotaped in a very sadistic manner. And the film was sent then to Güero to cause further hurt and anger. Güero soon had this painting commissioned in their memory. Rafael Enrique Clavel was the embodiment of evil, but Güero would have his revenge. First, he killed Rafael's lawyer, and then killed his 3 children in a mad rage. Clavel was then arrested and incarcerated and viciously murdered while in custody on Güero Palma Salazar's orders. Palma Salazar was re-arrested in Mexico and extradited to the United States. He was released from the Atwater facility in California, a facility of the United States Federal Bureau of Prisons in 2016. And he was extradited back to Mexico, where he was detained for the murders of 2 Nayarit police officers way back in 1995. He is currently held in the high-security Mexican Altiplano prison, where El Chapo was once held. Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garcia was another close associate of Chapo. Mayo was born and grew up in Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico, well known for being part of Mexico's Golden Triangle, which supplies drugs from the Sierra Madres region in Sinaloa and up to Chihuahua's northern region, as well as Durango, which is located just east of Sinaloa. Prior to the escape of El Chapo, Mayo Zambada was considered to be a member of the Juarez cartel, along with El Azul, mentioned in the Juarez cartel episode. And he even got along with Arellano Felix organization when they were given Baja California in the Tijuana-San Diego corridor by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. But that would soon change. He had joined with Amado Carrillo Fuentes after the Arellano Felix brothers forced him out of Tijuana. As described in the Tijuana cartel video, the AFO was strongest in the early to mid-1990s. After the death of Amado in the late 1990s, and after a crackdown on the AFO during a time when Güero Palma and Chapo Guzman were incarcerated, El Mayo became more important to the Sinaloa cartel. Chapo gave more control over to El Mayo in order to better run the organization. And Mayo greatly expanded their drug network through his smart business moves and political savvy. Mayo's right-hand man was Javier El JT Torres Felix after 1992. An AFL gunman tried to kill him at one of his ranches, but he escaped. Not before the AFO sicarios could massacre 12 people from the surrounding village. JT was arrested in Culiacan in 2004 by Mexican Gafe Special Forces. He was extradited to the U.S., later released and deported, whereby Mexican authorities rearrested him. After his arrest, his brother, Manuel El M1, became Mayo's right-hand man until he was killed in a gun battle in Culiacan in October 2012, and his funeral was attended by many who considered him to be a Sinaloa legend in the tradition of Jesus Malverde. This was about the same time when Mayo created a special hit squad called Los Antrax. I don't have enough time to get into Los Antrax in detail, but I'll try to do that at a later date, as they are a very interesting story that deserves their own episode. El Mayo formed close ties to the Colombian cocaine cartels, and he and Chapo were able to convince the Colombians that running their cocaine through Mexico was a better move than moving it through Miami, which is where most of it went previously. Joaquin Archibaldo El Chapo Guzman Loera was also born in Sinaloa, and he would become one of the most powerful drug lords in the world. As I said, he began working with El Güero Palma Salazar in the 1970s when they both were at that time low-level players in the Guadalajara cartel. But he was one of the pioneers who helped El Güero map smuggling routes into the United States, and his drug network still exists in many cities all over the U.S. As Chapo became more schooled in the ways of the drug business, he was a mastermind behind shipping massive amounts of cocaine, marijuana, and heroin, as well as methamphetamine. He was a pioneer of using drug tunnels to smuggle drugs underneath the border. And he also had ways to get it over the border by plane, by boat, and even by mules who would pack large amounts of drugs on their backs and smuggle it along the porous U.S.-Mexican border. Whereas many drug cartels, like the Zetas, prefer to use violence and terrorism to get their way, Chapo was known to buy off people. He would pay very large sums of money to get things done. So I guess you could say he was a little bit more of a diplomat than some of these other drug lords. He was a very smart businessman. In fact, Forbes 500 ranked him as one of the richest men in the world. And many people compare him to the wealth and power of Pablo Escobar. Chapo was first captured in Guatemala in 1993, where he was running drugs out of that country from airports out in the jungle. He was then extradited to Mexico, but was able to bribe his way out and just walk out of the prison as a free man, or depending on who you asked, smuggled in a laundry cart. Regardless, it's very obvious that he had inside help. This would be the first of many escapes that Chapo Guzman would be involved in, and he would be captured many times as well, but always tried to outsmart police and law enforcement authorities who were hot on his trail. As I discussed in the Juarez cartel video, after Amado Carrillo Puente's death, there was a vacuum in the Juarez area as well as many other parts of Mexico. And Chapo took advantage of this, as well as the Beltran Leyva organization brothers and Juan Jose Esparragosa Moreno, aka El Azul, started working more with the Sinaloa cartel again, as well as El Mayo Zambada, due to the fact that Amado's brother Vicente was nowhere near the leader and businessman that his brother Amado was. In 2001, Chapo went to war with the Juarez cartel, as explained in that video. In 2002, Amado was named as a drug kingpin by then President Bush. At that time, Chapo was just one of many drug lords in Mexico. He was not yet the biggest. But like a chess expert, Chapo outmaneuvered and outstrategized his rivals. He always tried to think 2 or 3 moves ahead. He had a habit of making truces and alliances with people and then breaking them, often turning on them, and even snitching them off to authorities in order to take over their drug operations and territories. Indeed, many people think that El Chapo colluded with Mexican government officials for years and even helped in his escapes, but finally decided that it was time to get rid of him after the U.S. put extreme pressure for his capture. El Azul, El Mayo, Chapo, and the Beltran Leyva organization took on what had become probably an even more powerful cartel than the Gulf cartel. This was the Ariano Felix organization, in the 1990s. And by the early 2000s, Chapo again figured out a way to dominate Tijuana. First, in 2001, he went to war against the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas, who had moved into large parts of eastern Mexico, even down south into Chiapas. At that time, the Millennial Cartel, consisting of the Valencia brothers and their supporters out of Michoacan, had made inroads into Gulf Cartel territory, and Chapo supported them. Finally, the war ended when the Beltran Leyva brothers set up a truce with the Gulf Cartel, and they agreed to a ceasefire and to keep their respective plazas. Ociel agreed to pull out of Monterrey if Arturo Beltran Leyva left Nuevo Laredo. As stated in the Tijuana Cartel video, when Ramon was killed while hunting down Chapo in February 2002, this was a big blow to the Tijuana Cartel. And then Benjamin was captured shortly after. This was the beginning of the end for the Tijuana Cartel. As stated in that video, it is believed that Chapo gave logistics to help hunt down and kill Ramon, as well as capture Benjamin, who was probably lucky he didn't get killed. At this same time, Chapo had an alliance with remnants of the Guadalajara cartel that was run by Ignacio El Nacho Coronel Villarreal, who was big into dealing methamphetamine. After Amado Carrillo Fuentes' death, and subsequent war in Juarez with Chapo Guzman's forces, El Nacho aligned himself with the Cartel del Milenio in Jalisco and with the Beltran Leyva organization in Sinaloa. When the Beltran Leyvas broke away from the Sinaloa alliance, El Nacho backed up Chapo and even married off his niece, a 2007 Beauty Queen winner, Emma Coronel Aispuro, to marry the much older Chapo. In fact, she was 32 years younger than him. On July 29, 2010, El Nacho was killed in a shootout with the Mexican army, which opened up a big power vacuum in Jalisco and Guadalajara. I've visited Mazatlan a few times and interviewed Sinaloa cartel members in the King County Jail and at the federal detention facility where I worked in 2022. Chapo was recaptured in Mazatlan in 2014, but Chapo escaped once again in the Altiplano prison, whereby a tunnel was drilled from very far away underneath the prison right up into his cell, where he escaped down a chute and then climbed down to a motorcycle, which whisked him away on a man-made rail made especially for the motorcycle. It was a very elaborate escape, worthy of a Hollywood movie. For a few years, Chapo pretty much owned Tijuana with his sicarios and drug tunnels, but remnants of the AFO tried to cling on to what power they had left. Chapo and his Cartel de Sinaloa, though, were gaining the upper hand, and that's when the Cartel Tijuana Nueva Generacion was born and aligned themselves with El Mencho and Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, who I'll cover in my next video. After being on the run, Chapo was recaptured in January 2016 in Los Mochis, which is in the northern part of Sinaloa. When the Mexican Army and Special Forces hit his hideout, he was being guarded by several individuals who engaged in gunfire and were killed. One of his main bodyguards, Ivan El Cholo Gastelum, was captured with him. Cholo Ivan and El Chapo actually escaped that raid out a trap door in the bathroom and ran through the sewer system, popped up, carjacked an SUV, but were finally caught after a dragnet surrounded the area. They offered their captors an enormous bribe, but this time the cops would not be bought. As you see here in the back of the police car, Chapo is already thinking about his next move and how he might escape again. After a long trial and several individuals testifying against him, Chapo was incarcerated. His wife Emma attended his trial, but he was found guilty on 17 counts against him and given life in prison plus 30 years. In November 2021, Emma herself pled guilty to assisting her husband and was given 3 years in a U.S. prison.
A wave of violence swept through Mexico's Culiacan city on Thursday as security forces clashed with gang gunmen after the arrest of Ovidio Guzman, a key figure of the Sinaloa cartel and son of drug baron Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Witness video showed vehicles on fire and passengers on a commercial flight diving for cover as gunshots rang out at the city's international airport. Shots were fired as another plane flown by the Mexican Air Force taxied on the runway.
I will have to do a separate video on Los Chapitos, Chapo's sons. There's just too much information there. Aureliano and El Mayo. El Mayo is now old and hiding in the mountains. I hope you've enjoyed these drug cartel videos so far. and that you return to watch future videos on them and other criminal organizations worldwide. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.